Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining a new webinar by Invesp. We have a fairly interesting topic today, quality score demystified. And we are honored today to have Frederick Villiers with us. He's one of the first 500 employees at Google, where he spent 10 years building AdWords and teaching AdWords. He's actually a Google AdWords evangelist. He's also the co-founder of Optimizer. If you're not familiar with Optimizer, it's an AdWords tool company focused on unique data insights, one-click optimization, advanced reporting to make account management a lot more effective. Frederick had spoken at several conferences. If you attend any of the industry conferences, he was last at the HeroConf at London. He spoke at PubCon Las Vegas, SMX East. Now, before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Let me see. So you can join the conversation by tweeting at us. You can use the hashtag InvespCRO. You can tweet at us at Invesp. And we have staff members actually in a couple of continents, three continents actually, monitoring the Twitter feed. So please send us your questions. We'll answer them either during the session or towards the end. We'll make sure also you can use the Q&A chat feature in the GoToMeeting to send us any questions that you might have. Something else for those of you guys who are joining the webinar for the first time, an Invesp webinar. If you're not familiar with the My Invesp community, you can go ahead and create a free account for yourself. What we have is an A/B testing tool that's available for free up to 75,000 page views. It's a full conversion optimization platform. There's plenty of conversion optimization webinars, infographics, ebooks available. If you would like also as a special offer in this webinar, you can receive a conversion rate optimization assessment for your website. Send an email to convert@invesp.com. The webinar recording will be available on our YouTube channel this coming Monday. So for those of you guys who are not sure, we always get this question, you can check out our YouTube channel, invesp.com/YouTube. That will redirect you to our YouTube channel. And like I said, the webinar recording will be available this Monday. Finally, if you would like to get a free copy, we're handing out 5 copies of our book on conversion optimization, The Art and Science of Converting Prospects into Customers. It's an Amazon.com best-selling book. So only 5 copies, and this is something that we do at our webinars. Just shoot us an email to convert@invesp.com. With that, I'm going to turn it to Frederick. And one second. Frederick, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Khalid, and thank you everyone for attending today's session. So I'm going to go into screen sharing mode here and show you my slides. Okay, so now you should see my slides. If not, if there's any technical issues, just chat right there in the chat box and we'll try to help resolve it for you. And like Khalid said, we'll take questions through all the channels that he mentioned. If there's any huge questions where I'm losing people, we'll definitely take those on the spot, but we're going to try to save most of the questions for the end so that we can get the flow, keep the flow going. So we're going to talk about Google Quality Score, what it is, and how you can improve it. So like Khalid said, my name is Frederick Villiers. I worked at Google back in 2002 when it was fewer than 500 people. And then I left the company when it was 100 times bigger, when it was over 40,000 employees. I decided to continue working in the PPC and the AdWords space, and I started managing some accounts, and I found that doing some of the operations that account managers do typically is actually quite time consuming. And the tools that I had helped build while I was inside of Google, so I built the AdWords editor, I was involved in Quality Score, a number of other things, I found that those tools were kind of lacking for some of the things that typical PPC managers like to do. So I looked at some other tools in the space, and I found they were either too expensive or they didn't do enough work for me. So I decided to put my engineering skills to the test, and I built a company called Optimizer along with a couple of other ex-Googlers. And if you like what I talk about, you can also follow me on Search Engine Land, and I also write for PPC Hero, and I do quite a bit of tweeting at my handle at Silicon Valley. So background on Optimizer, Khalid mentioned this, but basically we have 4 areas. We really make it super easy to do AdWords scripts. We have something called enhanced scripts. We can help you with reporting, so we can aggregate all the reporting, help you send that out to your clients. We can do data insights where we turn the boring data tables that Google AdWords gives you into pretty visualizations that actually help you understand what's happening with the account. And then best of all, we can do one-click optimizations. And this is where we know, based on the data and the signals that we see, what would be a good for your account. And rather than just telling it to you, we're also going to let you make that suggestion, that optimization through our tool. So that's a huge time saver and PPC account managers. But to the topic at hand. So we're here to talk about quality score, and I'm going to cover 3 areas. What is quality score? How does Google calculate it? And how do you measure and improve it? And then hopefully we'll have some time towards the end for Q&A. So here's a picture of a cow. Why is there a picture of a cow in a talk about quality score? Well, it's because it illustrates the principle of the wisdom of the crowds. And so if you look back to the early 1900s, there was this guy by the name of Sir Francis Galton. He was a scientist, and he, excuse me, he had this idea that if you went to a county fair, where one of the common games was to guess the weight of a piece of livestock, he said that if you took the average of all the guesses from experts and non-experts alike, if you took that average, it would be better or closer to the actual weight than the guess of one individual expert. And so he ran that test, and it turned out that he was actually right. And so ever since the early 1900s, that principle of the wisdom of the crowds has been shown and proven many, many times to be really valid and a great way to figure out questions, answers to questions that you may have. So the wisdom of the crowds is actually the same thing that Google uses when it looks at quality score. Right? Today, quality score is the name that Google gives this metric. Historically, it was really based on click-through rate. And so click-through rate, if you think about it, is really the wisdom of the crowd. So it's people who do searches on Google and who see ad results and organic results, and they vote which of those results are the best ones by clicking on them. And then, of course, Google does take a look at what happens after the click, but the first whether something seemed relevant is really that click behavior. And so that made a lot of sense for Google to start using that metric, because when I joined Google in 2002, one of my functions, or one of the things that I could do, was I could review ads and I could look at somebody's keyword and I could say whether that was a relevant keyword or not a relevant keyword. Now, I may be able to make pretty good judgments on some consumer goods, but when it comes to a plumber or a plumbing supply store trying to sell widgets and gaskets and what have you that plumbers sell, I'm not an expert in that area. I don't know my widget from my gasket, and so I'm not the best person to make a judgment on relevance. It is much better to look at the wisdom of the crowds and take that average signal to determine if an ad is good quality, and hence quality score. So now Google has quality score because the advertising ecosystem about a decade ago, a little bit more than a decade ago, was very, very broken. People hated ads. Ad blockers were everywhere because ads were generally pretty irrelevant. You had ads for Punch the Monkey, whatever you were reading on the internet, people were trying to sell you a credit card. You know, the ads were just intrusive. They were annoying. There were pop-unders, pop-overs. There were sites where you couldn't button to get away from it, so it was just a nightmare for consumers. And I think we're seeing a little bit of the same thing happening again now, especially on mobile devices. The ad experience is very bad, and that's why the industry is once again talking about ad blockers as potentially a serious issue. But what Google figured was, rather than combating the ad blockers, let's combat the underlying cause of why people want to have ad blockers, and that's the fact that ads are relevant. If the ads are not relevant, that's very problematic for the ecosystem because website publishers are not making money, right? People don't want to put ads if users don't like those ads, if they're going to block them anyway. It's bad for users because they have a horrible user experience, and it's bad for businesses because they can't take advantage of this growing channel, this growing trend of people spending a lot of time online, and they can't capture new customers out of that. So what Google did was they said we can fix this whole broken ecosystem by introducing quality score. And so quality score is the one metric that aligns the incentives of all three parties. If we can have some way that we show high quality ads, the users will happily click on them without thinking twice. I've spoken to large crowds and I've asked a question: how many of you here have never clicked on an ad on Google? Now, for you on this webinar, you understand what these ads are, right? So you probably would give me a truthful answer, but in these big rooms, half of the people would raise their hands and say, I've never clicked on an ad on Google. And I would go back to them and I would say, well, you're probably lying, because I know Google makes $60 billion a year, and those clicks must be coming from somewhere. Certainly, you people in the room must be doing some of these clicks too, but the reason people don't think they're clicking on ads is because they don't look like ads, because they're actually answering questions and helping people get solutions to what they need. And so they don't perceive it as advertising, which is typically thought of as being intrusive and not that relevant. So you have happy users happily clicking on these ads without even knowing that they're ads necessarily. The advertisers are happy because they have good quality, because they had to pick good keywords. So the users who click on the ads tend to be actually looking for what it is that they sell. And the publishers are super happy too, because the publishers are actually monetizing the pages that people consume on their website. So it's good for the whole ecosystem. And so quality score was really that one metric that brought it all together. Now, I'm talking here to a number of people on this webinar, and none of you are ecosystems. All of you are individuals. You have your own companies. You have your own agencies. So let's bring this quality score thing a little bit more closer to home and how it impacts you. So quality score does impact a number of things that you would typically care about. So first of all, the eligibility of your ad to be shown on a certain search results page. That's the starting point. Once Google has established that your ad is good enough and eligible to be on the page, then the question becomes, what rank are you going to have? So vis-a-vis your competitors, who's going to take the top position, who's going to take the number 2 position, etc. And then when it comes to positions, there's the secondary question of, do any of the ads qualify to be promoted to the top of the page? Google has a secondary threshold, and that says we're only going to at the top of the search results pages if we find that those ads are at least as useful, at least as relevant as the organic results. If Google finds that the organic results are much more relevant, then all of the ads would be pushed off to the right-hand side. You've probably seen many situations where there's no ads on the page, and that's not because nobody's bidding for those, but it's simply because no ads may have met the eligibility standards for Google to even be good enough to be on that page. Now, once the rank has been decided, out of that comes the fact that your CPC, your actual CPC, the price that you pay for that one click, should you get it, that's determined by your rank. So as your rank goes up, your price can go down. DKI, so that's word insertion. This can only be used for ads that have a high enough quality. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 here, because using DKI and showing the keyword in the ad text typically increases the perceived relevance from a user's perspective. And so typically that will lead to a higher CTR. However, if Google doesn't have a lot of data about your ads quite yet, then DKI may not work. They may just revert to the default insertion text. So what's important here is that you build up a really strong CTR for your ads so that you'll be eligible to take advantage of a great feature like dynamic keyword. And then there's tons of ad extensions nowadays. Some of these are automatic, some of these are manual, but ad extensions can really boost your click-through rates as well. But once again, these extensions may not be available to you unless you qualify for certain positions on the page. So as you probably noticed, the top ad on the page usually has pretty big site links. They have expanded site links. And so that's something that you will not be able to take advantage of until you get to that really high position. And to get to that really high position, you have to have either a really high bid or a really good quality score, or a combination of these two things. So that's how it matters to you. Now, let's make that even a little bit more real. And this is a screenshot from the Optimizer tool suite that we have. What we do in Optimizer is we take a daily snapshot of every keyword's quality score, and we show that to you on a graph. So Google doesn't save that for you, but we do. So what you can see here is if you plot out the quality score, the blue line, in this case, it's fluctuating a bit, and then it drops for this account. And you can notice that a few days later, this average CPC for that account rises up. And what probably happened in this case is the advertiser noticed that their rank was decreasing after the quality score had dropped, and so they said, we want to get back to those higher positions, and maybe we just have to increase our bids to be able to regain those positions. So you can see there's a very strong correlation there between what happens to your quality score and what happens in terms of the cost and what you actually have to pay to AdWords. And so this is as close to home as I can bring it. As the higher your quality score, the lower your costs in AdWords will be, and vice versa, of course. So how is that CPC determined as relates to quality score? Well, roughly in 2001, So that was a year before I joined Google. It was very simple. The ad rank was determined by multiplying your click-through rate by your maximum CPC bid. Very simple, right? So in this situation, and notice, by the way, I don't talk about quality score here. I talk about CTR, but CTR is basically what quality score was back in the day. So if you doubled your CTR, you would only have to pay half as much in terms of a maximum bid to maintain the same ad rank or the same position on the page. Now, of course, if your CTR goes up, you may actually jump above a competitor, so your bid is not necessarily going to drop in half. But if you had stayed in that same position and reduced your bid, you could have actually reduced it by half and maintained the same position on the page. So very direct correlation there between quality score or CTR and how much you had to pay. In 2005, it became a little bit more. So Google said, rather than just looking at straight up CTR, let's look at predicted CTR. So rather than looking at historical data, let's look at what we think some signals will tell us about this particular auction and what the CTR might be for this particular user at this time of day from this location. And so rather than calling it predicted CTR, Google decided to call it quality score because that would enable a couple of other signals to be fed in. And we'll talk about what those signals are. But so quality score multiplied by maximum bid, that became your ad rank. But that was a little bit more removed now from CTR, which was a metric you can actually see in your AdWords account. Nowadays, the way that the ad rank formula works is they've added one more component, and that's the ad extension. So it's your bid, your quality score, and your ad extension. And so kind of important to know here that ad extensions technically don't contribute to quality score. However, they do kind of serve the same purpose. The ad extension by nature typically increases your click-through rate. And as you have that better click-through rate, that will boost your ad rank as well. So either improve your quality score or use more ad extensions to achieve that same lift in CTR to reduce your maximum bid. The other thing you notice is there's no longer just that straight up multiplication. So nowadays you can't say exactly if I double my quality score, my maximum bid will drop in half. So that's no longer the case. And the reason that Google got rid of that multiplication is that people were gaming the system. And so one way that people game the system is one rule in AdWords used to be that ads would always have to respect their ad rank. So the number 2 ad could never jump above the number 1 ad. That kind of makes sense, but people were gaming this, and the way what they were doing is the number 1 ad sometimes would keep editing their ad text, so the ad kept being in the unreviewed, not approved state. And ads that are not reviewed cannot show at the top of the search results page. They can also not be syndicated to third parties. And because the number 1 ad kept being unreviewed, it kept pushing all the ads to the right-hand side of the page. Even if the number 2 ad was awesome, it was not being changed, it was approved, so it could have qualified for a top position, but it didn't. And people were actually messing with their competitors. Google said, if we allow something like out of order, then the number 2 ad can jump over the number 1 ad, show up at the top of the page, and that's actually going to be a better user experience, and it stops people from gaming the system. So that's one of the reasons why the simple multiplication got taken out of the system, and now the ad rank is a function of these 3 things that you see on the page. So the other thing to talk about here then is that AdWords did do a relatively recent update to quality score in July, the end of July of this year. And so the most significant change, as they said, was that the new starting quality score of keywords where they don't have a lot of data would be a 6. And that's interesting because a lot of people have assumed over time that 7 was an average or okay quality score. Now Google's sort of saying that by default stuff is going to be at a 6, so that's kind of your average quality score to think about. With a tool like Optimizer, as you can see there, we could very nicely track what was the impact of that algorithm change on the quality score for this particular account. If you hadn't been tracking it, you would have read about this update on Search Engine Land or on the Google blog, and now you could not have gone back historically in time and said, show me my quality score yesterday and show me my quality score today, so that would have created potential confusion and not put you in a great position if you had to report up to a manager or a client about what the impact of that change was to your accounts. So here's another illustration that, again, from our tool and our research, but it shows that quality score 6 really is the new normal. So the light-colored bars on this chart show you how many keywords were at a certain quality score before the change, and then the dark-colored bar is how many keywords were at that same level after the quality score change. And so you can see that for this particular account, we had a lot of keywords at a quality score of 10, and then that dropped significantly. Same for 9s. And we had huge gains in quality scores 5s and 6s. And so that reduced the average quality score of this account. But it also, again, illustrates that Google considers 6 the new normal. The one thing Google didn't really make super clear was that it wasn't just going to be new keywords that would start at a quality score of 6, but it could be a lot of existing keywords in your accounts where they just didn't quite know with enough certainty what the quality score should be. And again, these are the keywords that used to be at a 10 or a 9 in this account, but didn't have a lot of data to prove that. All of those have shifted now to 5s and 6s. So that does mean there is a bit of an actual impact to accounts. So around the time that Google was doing those changes, we at Optimizer wanted to really answer a fundamental question, which is, what is the direct correlation between quality score and the CPC that you have to pay? So because we can't look at CPC independently, we thought, why don't we look at first page bid estimates? So what is the minimum price to be on the first page with Google? And so we looked at an analysis of keywords that had shifted in terms of quality score, and then how many of those had gone up in terms of first page bid and how many of those went down in terms of first page bid. The reason that you see up and down movements is because there's certainly competition. So even if the quality score changes by a point, the first page bid is influenced by your quality score change, but it's also influenced by what happens with your competitors on that day. So if they're changing bids, if they have day parting strategies, that could also play into this. But what we thought was really interesting was that for 71%, on average, or in some cases as high as 74%, 77%, as high as that, those keywords had no change in first page bid estimate. And that didn't make sense to us, because if you assume that quality score really is directly tied to CPC, then you should see a larger number of these keywords having a change in first page bid. So we don't believe that quality score is unrelated to CPC. So what we think is happening is that the two systems are not updating at the same time. So your quality score number may change in AdWords, but the first page bid doesn't get updated at the same time. So it may take another day for that to happen. I think this is really important to understand, because if you are using the first page bid estimate as part of some bidding strategy that you take, you do have to know that it seems to be, in many cases, out of sync with Google's current expectation of your quality score, which is a big factor in ranking. So if you were to come into AdWords and just put your bid to the first page bid minimum, then you may actually still not show up on the first page because it's out of sync with reality to some degree. And we've actually noticed that with some agencies that we've worked with. We're just setting that first page bid oftentimes doesn't get you on the first page of results as you might expect. So that's important to know, and hopefully quite actionable. So the other important point is that quality score, because it's kind of another way of saying CTR, you shouldn't confuse it with quality score is exactly CTR. So a quality score going from 4 to 8 does not mean that your ad rank is going to double the way that it would be that case if CTR went from a 4 to an 8. So if your CTR doubles, then yes, your CPC will roughly drop in half. That's pretty safe to say. But quality score 4 to an 8, that's not actually necessarily a doubling of the underlying CTR. So you can't just assume that that's going to have a 50% impact on CPC. So there's been a number of studies that have been published, and some of you may have read these, but this is a study from Click Equations, which is now acquired by Acquisio. And this is another study done by WordStream. And keep in mind, WordStream speaks to a different audience, right? WordStream typically talks to an audience of small, medium businesses who are not that savvy when it comes to online marketing, so they may be dumbing it down a little bit more than what makes sense for us on this webinar here today. But so these published studies that basically say if your quality score number doubles, then your cost drops in half, these are not correct. So discountees. What we wanted to find out though was what is the actual impact. So here we looked at some averages and we saw what happens when the quality score increases by 1 point. And we looked at this data 1 week versus the next week. So we were normalizing for the day of the week effect. And we also did it for 1 week over 2 weeks later. we normalized the data further by looking at low competition auctions. So we only looked at auctions where the first page bid estimate was the same as the top of page bid estimate, kind of indicating there were very few competitors in that auction. And so when we averaged across all of those methodologies that we used, we saw that if you were previously at a quality score of a 1, that's what this line represents. At the bottom here on the x-axis, you have your quality scores before. If that increases by 1 point, the blue line indicates what is in your first page bid. So if you go from a 1 to a 2, you roughly have a 30 decrease in the amount that you have to spend for the same clicks. Then if you go from a 2 to a 3, or a 3 to a 4, or even a 4 to a 5, the impact is a little bit less. When you get to a 5, a 6, a 7, all of these numbers, the impact is much higher. And that's something we actually saw, that there seems to be kind of a threshold around a quality score of a 5 or a 6, where anything where you improve your quality score above those numbers actually has a much bigger impact on your account than making movements in the lower trenches of quality score, with the exception of going from a 1 to a 2. And sort of the biggest impact that we see, a quality score of 8 going to a 9, there you have roughly a 40% decrease in the cost per click that you have to pay. So we thought those numbers were quite interesting. Now, again, how does quality score really impact cost? So the point here is really illustrated in this chart. What we show here is the x-axis. These are your quality scores. What we show on the y-axis is the associated click-through rate that corresponds to. And so what you can see here is that perhaps going from a quality score of a 1 to a 2 doesn't actually mean that you had that big of a jump, so you don't have that much of a vertical in terms of improvement in CTR. So there's going to be a lower impact on your cost per click from jumping from a 1 to a 2. And again, this is sort of made up, but it's to illustrate the point. And then here then what we're saying is going from a 6 to a 7, that could actually span a very large range of, on the vertical axis here, the CTR. And the CTR is really what Google cares about in terms of setting your CPC. So that kind of illustrates why you can't just assume that going from a quality score of a 4 to an 8 is just going to straight up cut CPC in half. There's actually a lot more happening behind the scenes. I was on the team that decided to put 10 levels of quality score in place, and again, we just sort of overlaid those numbers on, but it's not a linear progression of CTR, and that's really important to know. And so the thing that we did see for sure is if your quality score was a 5 or a less, it seems like there's some minimums coming into play where your minimum first page bid is really dependent on the competitiveness of the auction. There's like almost this minimum threshold. Once you get above a quality score of a 6, your CPC is actually much more influenced by having these jumps between different quality scores. So that was some interesting research I thought that we did. Now we looked at it some other way, and this again is saying if you have an increase, what does the 1 point drop correspond to in terms of an increase in CPC? And so these are percentages, right? And now you can see that again for a 6 to a 10, you do see much higher changes in first page bids and CPCs when you have those movements. This plot, by the way, this is a scatter plot sort of thing where we show all the different data points. So there's always these outliers. Here we see someone almost having a 400% in cost, but it seems to be more clustered here in the 50% range, which kind of validates what the 2 slides ago was showing. But you also notice very interestingly that once again in these low numbers between a 2 and a 5, the impacts are much, much lower in terms of the CPC impact. So
Frederick, let me ask a quick question over here. Now, everybody's familiar with quality score at a keyword level, but you mentioned that there is an account level quality score. Can you just kind of touch on that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I'm actually going to get in that here in the next few slides. So if I don't address it, let's come back to that then.
Okay, very good.
But yeah, definitely there's like this account level that helps Google figure out what's happening in the beginning. Now, as far as quality scores, so like you said, there's keyword level quality scores, and those are the ones we're familiar with. The unfortunate thing is Google only shows you a single number, but really in the back end, they do have different quality scores depending on the flavor of where your ad is showing. So it could be your quality score for search on Google, could be quality score for individual search partners, could be quality score for content, could be quality score for mobile. What you see next to your keyword in the AdWords interface is actually a blend of the quality score for mobile and desktop, so all the devices that you run on, but just on Google search. And additionally, when the query matches exactly to what your keyword is. So another point here is that what you see in the account is really not what you get. And then I've kind of stressed that in the research slides, but let me make the point another way. So the number 1 to 10 that you see in the account is simply an approximation of how Google expects a keyword to perform. The actual scores that they use are unique for every query. So even though in your account you may see that a keyword has a quality score of 7, really what Google wants to know is, for this specific auction where the query happens to be cheap blue widgets, what is the predicted CTR that we might achieve? And that's the number that they use to do the ranking. So that predicted CTR of 15% might then correspond to the quality score bucket of 7, but that's kind of almost anonymizing what that PCTR number is. Now, as far as what goes into quality score, Google says this themselves. They say it's click-through rate, relevancy, and landing page. Now, click-through rate, that's pretty simple. Relevancy, that's kind of the hand-waving. This is where people say it's a black box. We don't understand what's going on, so I'll take you inside that black box in just a few slides. And then landing page, this is where a company like Invesp can really help you in terms of making sure you have landing pages that are relevant to users, where users can convert very easily, that meet the needs of your users. Now, first point, the first factor here, quality score, like I said, is really mostly a factor of CTR. You can look at videos by Hal Varian, the chief economist from Google, and he doesn't put an exact percentage on it, but really by and large, your quality score is a factor of the click-through rate in your account. Now, Google slices and dices that click-through rate in many ways, and this is where the account quality score comes into play. So, if you think about it, there's really 3 key elements. There's the account, there's the keyword, and there's the ad text. If you add a new keyword to the account for the first time, Google doesn't know how you're going to do for that keyword, so they have to rely on data about how your account has historically performed. That's the account level quality score, and I'll tell you how you can calculate that in just a little bit. But so it's based on your historical account performance. Are you typically better than average, or are you typically worse than average? That sets a baseline for Google what might likely happen with new keywords that you put into the account. Now, of course, they look beyond that. They also look at, does anyone else, anywhere across AdWords, has anyone else ever used that same keyword? That's probably another good baseline for a starting quality score and a starting ranking position. So, okay, if they say, okay, you picked a keyword that generally works really, really well for people, but at the account level, we've noticed that you're typically kind of a worse than average advertiser, they're going to decrease your starting quality score for that keyword, even though they think it's typically a pretty good keyword. What becomes really important, though, is as soon as you start getting impressions for your keyword with your chosen ad text, that's what matters the most to Google. So that's factor 3 that you see on there. As soon as Google has enough data about that, that's really what they want to use. They don't care about the account level anymore. They don't care about system-wide performance for other advertisers on that keyword. What they want to know is, how do you do with that keyword and that ad text that you have? Now, the other thing to notice here is the keyword to ad relationship. That's really what an ad group is in AdWords. But I didn't put ad group on this slide because the ad group ID doesn't actually matter to Google. So if you took the same keyword and the same ad text and you moved it into a different ad group somewhere else in the account, you would start off with the same quality scores as you had in the past. So the quality score is preserved across AdWords. Campaign is also not on here because it's also not a factor. So long as you put stuff in another campaign with the same targeting options, you're going to get the same quality scores. Keyword match type also doesn't matter. So don't just go and add different match types just to try to boost your quality score. So knowing now that it's really the keyword to ad text relationship that matters the most, how long should you wait before deciding that maybe your new keyword is not working well? So again, we did an analysis on our data, and we looked for how many impressions a specific keyword had and how often it was changing its quality score away from a 6. And keeping in mind that 6 is the new starting point that Google shows in the interface, we're just saying how likely is it that if your quality score is a 6, and you've had one impression, that the next day your quality score is going to be some different number. It's almost 60% chance that the next day it's going to change. And so you see that even after 10 impressions, there's still a pretty good chance it's going to change. But then once you get to about 100 impressions, that curve really flattens out. So this is saying that after 100 impressions, there's still a pretty good chance your quality score will change based on the new data Google gets, but they seem to have at least set some good base levels, so it's not as likely to change as things that have fewer than 100 impressions. So that's kind of another important point, is 100 impressions is sort of that cutoff that you should maintain as far as when it looks like Google knows what your performance should be. So Google, when they look at click-through rate, they really do look at exact match click-through rate. So the quality score number that they report in your account is a factor of the CTR when the query is an exact match to your keyword. Now, this is semantics, and this gets a little bit complicated, and we didn't name stuff that well, I guess, when we built AdWords. But an exact match keyword is one of those keywords that you put between square brackets. But that's not what Google looks for. They don't look for the match type that you've given to a keyword. They look at what is the match type between your keyword and the query that happens. So in this table, you can see something, if the query is blue widgets, and that's also what your keyword happened to be, even though that's a broad match keyword, this is considered an exact match to Google. So the impact of the CTR will reflect in that number that you see next to the keyword, the number 1 to 10. Of course, it also impacts Google's real-time expectation of what that quality score will be. If, however, the user searches for buy blue widgets, now this is no longer exactly the same as what your keyword was. So, even if this was an exact match keyword, it would not be counted towards the quality score that's going to be shown next to that keyword, blue widgets in this case. But Google will remember what does the addition of the word buy do to the CTR of this query. And the same thing for blue widgets for free. So now we're adding the words for free, so Google's going to keep that into mind. And the next time somebody does a search for blue widgets for free, they're going to look at that historical performance when those additional words were part of the query. So don't go and mess with match types just for the sake of getting better quality score. But of course, do use match types because they can let you set better bids, they can let you target your traffic better, but don't do it for the sake of trying to get a better quality score. Okay, so that was factor number one. Factor number two, and this is the black box aspect, but this is the real-time relevancy, and how does that impact quality score? And this is kind of the cool thing. This is where Google looks at every single auction and says, well, what do we know about the time of day, the location, the device they're using, the weather in that place? What are all these factors telling us about quality score? But really what they're asking is, what does this tell us about click-through rate? So if the fact that it's a sunny day and it's noon and the user is located in California and they're searching on a mobile device, does that lead us to expect a higher click-through rate or a lower click-through rate for this specific keyword? And that's what they do. And so a good example here is if you think about the keyword jobs. Jobs, if somebody searches for that, is probably looking for employment. But if you were searching that from Palo Alto, California, where Steve Jobs used to live, maybe chances are you're actually looking for that movie that just came out about Steve Jobs. So Google will look at those real-time signals to say, oh, in the case of this person who reads a lot of technology news, who's really interested in Apple products, maybe we should show an ad for the movie Steve Jobs, even though for the majority of people, we should have shown the ads for employment when the search was for jobs. So these unique real-time factors can really help Google do a better job. One example here too is Google at one point said, let's take a look at the lunar cycle and let's figure out if the lunar cycle has any sort of an impact on people's click-through rate behavior. And so if you want to take a moment to guess for yourselves what the answer was, but it turns out it's not actually having an impact. So lunar cycle does not impact CTR, so Google threw that out as a factor. But the important thing here is that Google did consider it. So we asked the question, does this factor have any impact on expected CTR, predicted CTR? And if it had had an impact, then that would have become one of the relevancy signals that Google would have considered. Now, when I talk about quality score and relevancy, how do I boil that back down to explaining what's really happening to Google, why they really care so much about CTR? And this is literally the money slide in this deck. So if you understand nothing else, this is the slide that's going to explain both why quality score really is CTR, And it's also talking about money, so literally the money slide. So better quality score means more revenue for Google. How does that work? Well, typically, if you're an online publisher, and Google's a publisher, right? People do searches, and every time they do a search, a page is loaded, and they try to monetize that page. That's really no different than Yahoo publishing articles, where the same thing happens. The more people who read those articles, the more advertising money they're trying to get. Now, a typical publisher will charge on a CPM basis. That's a cost per mille. That's a cost per 1,000 impressions. Now, what is cost per 1,000 impressions? It's basically dollars per click multiplied by clicks over impressions. That's what CPM means. If you take a look at dollars per click, well, that's actually CPC, and clicks per impression, that's actually CTR. So these happen to be the two factors that Google was using all the way in the beginning of ranking ads, right? So there's your ad rank. Now, all of a sudden, this is a brilliant insight, because Google, even though they say they're a CPC search engine, they do monetize on a CPM basis. So, and that makes it really beautiful, because now if twice as many people do searches on Google as before, even though they take the risk on people not clicking on the ads, they've neutralized that risk by integrating CTR into the equation, so that they're fundamentally still a cost per impression publisher and advertiser. And so, if you understand nothing else, the fact that CTR basically guarantees Google's revenue means that they're going to care very deeply about that. So even when they call it quality score, you can in many cases substitute quality score for CTR and understand what's happening. Now, the third element that Google publicly says is part of quality score is the landing page quality. And so the example that I have here is to say it's a really small part, first of all, of the quality score. Now, you could ask the question, which of these two pages is better? Excuse me. So here we have two big retailers, and really Google's not trying to make a judgment on which one of these has a better business model or a prettier page. These are both great pages. These are both great sites. They do very, very well. What Google was really going for with the landing page quality component was looking for sites that were scamming people, that didn't have good privacy policies, that would try to steal people's email addresses and then spam them, or that would promise a free iPad if you sign up 5 of your friends and then never send you the free iPad. Pages that were thin landing pages that were built only with the intent of driving you onto some other site through an affiliate program. So that's the type of stuff Google was trying to weed out. So unless your quality score component, your subcomponent for landing page says it's bad, I wouldn't focus too much on improving the landing page, because ultimately it's not a huge part of quality score. Now, that said, do use products like Invesp, because even though it's not going to necessarily improve your quality score, if you can double your conversion rate by having a better landing page, well, guess what? You can now pay twice as much for your CPC, and that's going to help you beat your competitors. That's going to help you get more traffic, but don't do it for the sake just of improving quality score. So, and finally, not technically part of quality score, but something we should talk about is ad extensions. So ad extensions do matter a lot in terms of the CTR of an account. So try to put in all the ad extensions that make sense for your account. Okay, final section, measuring and improving quality score. So this should be pretty familiar, but I'm putting in the slides just in case people need them. But you can find your quality score as a custom column in the AdWords interface. Now you can see the subcomponents of quality score by hovering next to the status of that keyword, and it will tell you the 3 subcomponents for expected click-through rate, ad relevance, and landing page experience. In the top right, here you see this is Optimizer's visualization. So this is an account level aggregate for your keyword ad relevance. That helps you figure out how you're doing for the whole account. And then there's some other tools that will break it out by individual keywords. Now, we've talked a bit about account quality score calculation, or account quality score. You can calculate that very simply by doing an impression-weighted quality score average for the account. You have the steps right here. There's some videos online that explain this. So if you want to do this yourself without a tool, that's how you would go about it. Now, we really think this is important because tracking historical quality score is important for troubleshooting. So if Google changes something, you're not going to be able to go back in time and understand how that's impacted you. If you made optimizations to an account and that's had some impact on your quality score, it's really hard for you to go back and see what that impact was unless you were tracking it. So a couple of solutions that people use is they either download keyword reports daily, including the quality score column. You can take one of the many AdWords scripts that people have published. Some of these are free scripts, and they will take your keyword level quality score, put it into a Google spreadsheet. It will even calculate your account level quality score. Or you can use a tool like Ours or like 10 Scores that will give you all of this through a pretty UI and a very to-use interface. So that's what our quality score tool currently looks like. And we do have a free 2-week trial on this. Now, again, the way that you can use these tools or these visualizations is now you can plot something like quality score compared to CPC. So if your boss is saying, well, okay, fine, you just improved quality score for the account, but what does that mean in terms of the bottom line? You can actually start correlating. So here you can see the date when the quality score changed, and you can do an analysis of what the CPC or the average or the total cost was after that improvement to quality score. This presentation, I last gave it in London, so I thought this was an interesting slide to put in, and the Americans on the call today will hopefully appreciate this, but I got to London, and I was wanting to take some money out of the ATM machine, and so the ATM machine straight up gives me attitude. I thought it was saying, we are dealing with your request. I was like, whoa, I'm sorry you have to deal with my request. And so for us in America, the word dealing has kind of a negative connotation, I think, right? It's you deal with stuff that you typically don't want to deal with. And the point here is if you want to improve your quality score, even a single word in the ad text can really have a huge impact on the CTR of how people perceive that ad. To bring it back to an actual advertising example, I was working with eBay when they were in the Netherlands, way back in the day when people didn't really know what eBay was. And they had ad text that said, come to eBay and find whatever it was you were looking for on eBay. Find this thing on eBay. While people had just gone to Google, they'd done a search, and here was this ad that said, find the same thing on eBay. And they were like, why would I want to go to another search engine to search again? Right? I've already done the search. When they took that one word, find, and they changed it to the word buy, all of a sudden people really understood what was happening, that this was an e-commerce website, and so the results went up dramatically. So some optimization tips that hopefully you can really act on is, first of all, create tightly themed ad groups. Make sure you're testing multiple ad texts in each ad group, because that's typically going to raise your CTR. Make sure you have a compelling call to action. Make sure you use CTR boosting elements like trademark symbols. Use your brands if they're big known brands. If you have ad extensions that make sense for your business, make sure you're using those, because even though they don't boost your quality score, they will boost your position, and they will lower the price that you have to pay. And then if you have keywords that have lots of impressions and low CTRs, low quality scores, make sure you're dealing with those. So go ahead and clean those up if you find that they're not profitable for you, because in aggregate, these could be contributing to a low account level quality score. So what does an ideal ad group look like? This is kind of an older Google slide, but it says between 5 and 30 closely related keywords. I think I put that point on the slide probably a decade ago, and some people have taken that to be gospel now, that you have to have between 5 and 30 keywords. That was just a guideline. My point is more, if you have more than 30 keywords, you can probably figure out a common theme to split that into at least 2 new ad groups. And then once you're able to split it into 2 ad groups, you can write an ad text that's much more closely related to each of the 2 new concepts that you have, and so that's going to boost your CTR. So don't use different match types for the same keywords. If you have brand keywords, by all means use those, because they have great CTRs. And then negative keywords are awesome, but they're not going to help you have a better quality score. So negative keywords help you target your correct traffic, but they're not going to improve quality score. When it comes to the ads, in the ad group, test at least 2 variations. One thing we commonly do nowadays is we have 2 variations for the non-mobile preferred and 2 variations for mobile preferred. So we're testing mobile preferred versus non-mobile preferred. Using the keyword in the ad text is a great thing to do, and DKI, dynamic keyword insertion, is great as well. For dynamic keyword insertion, Google considers what the ad text would have been with the keyword inserted, and that's what they use for measuring the CTR. Once again, use the ad extensions that make sense, and then answer the user's needs and avoid gimmicky ads. People, when they don't think it's ads, they actually click on it more than if it's something gimmicky and very promotional. And then the display URL does matter, because the display URL is something that people do see on the screen, on the page, and that does influence whether they click on your ad or a different ad. So take that into account. And then finally, best practices. So like I said, we noticed it takes about 100 impressions before quality score kind of starts to settle for Google. So give it at least that much time. If you find it's taking you too much time to get to 100 impressions, consider bidding up to be in a top position to get more of that traffic. And we do notice that even though quality score is position normalized, oftentimes there is a little bit of benefit from going to those higher positions where the position normalization factors that Google uses are not perfect. If you have bad quality score, make sure you respond to it by deleting those keywords. This is an important point too. People sometimes ask, should I delete or should I pause? If you pause to Google, that looks like you could potentially still advertise on those keywords in the future. So from a quality score perspective, it doesn't really matter, but from a policy perspective, it does. And I've actually run into examples of this where people who had paused a keyword 5 years ago, all of a sudden these keywords corresponded to a new category of disallowed products from a policy perspective to Google. And so Google actually flagged those accounts, even though those keywords have been paused for 5 years, for violating policy. And they said, well, it's because you've paused those keywords, you could actually reactivate them. And so to Google, that's an indication that you're not completely done with stuff. If you're actually completely done with something, call it what it is and just delete it, remove it. And then don't worry about experimentation. So experimentation is a good thing. Experimentation can get you that better CTR, the better quality score. If you find you do some experimentation and it actually hurts your account, you can always revert back to what it was before. So take a snapshot of the account through a tool like the AdWords editor so you can quickly go back to that older state of the account. But Google saves all of that historical data. So if you go back to the way it was before, your quality score will also roughly return to the level that it was prior to making those changes. And then at the end of the day, keep in mind that most investor calls, if you listen to public companies, they're not talking about quality score. The only company that talks about quality score is really Google. And the bottom line here is quality score is not a business KPI. I've seen plenty of advertisers with quality score 1 and 2 keywords that actually are very profitable. And so it's great to look at those keywords and say, clearly we have an opportunity to go from a 1 to a 2, a 2 to a 3, and make this somewhat better to impact the CPCs that we have to pay. But if you've tried and you can't do it, don't go and delete something that's profitable, because profitability is probably the KPI that you really should pay attention to. So with that, I'd love to take any questions if people have any, but that's an overview of quality score.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Frederick. And we have actually quite a few questions. We'll try and run through them quickly. Just in terms of, like I mentioned to everybody at the beginning of the webinar, for those of you who might have missed it, we will have the webinar recording this coming Monday. It should be up on our YouTube channel, and we'll send an email to everyone with a link to the webinar recording. A question in terms of just different ads, and I don't know if you probably have seen this data. Bounce rates for good ads that have high quality score. Is there an average bounce rate? Is a 75 or an 80% bounce rate? Is that normal on landing page?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually know the averages of bounce rates, and I was looking at a couple of accounts recently. What was I saying? I mean, 75, 80%, that seems a little bit. I mean, those are, if it's 75, 80% bounce rate, that's certainly high, right? But it also depends on the landing page. So a bounce is actually defined in different ways by different tools. And I believe to Google Analytics, it's a single page visit. So from that page, they could have called your business. They could have actually gone and completed a transaction, but never navigated to another page on your site, through Ajaxy type setups. So in those cases, that bounce rate is not necessarily horrible. What Google would really look at more is what is the user experience, and so they might look at bounce rate as one of the signals for that. But it's also how long does the user stay on that page, and in some cases it's fine to have a single page visit, so long as the user doesn't quickly come back to Google and seems to be looking for the next ad result, which is a clearer indication to Google that the ad they just clicked on before probably didn't answer their question, so that would be corresponding to a low quality score. And then also bounce rate, I mean, I think the reason you're asking the question is because if you have an 80% bounce rate, then you're paying for 4 out of 5 clicks you're paying and not getting any results. That just makes it all that much more expensive for you to be, successful, and your ROAS is going to go down, and so it's not good. So fix it if you can.
Definitely, that makes sense. And let's take a couple of the other questions over here. I just remember that one of our clients, his staff never kept track of his quality score, and at some point they wanted to take a look back at their, just kind of look at the historical performance, and it was such a challenge. I mean, they had no way really of pulling it. So, it's
Exactly.
one of those
Data
things.
just compare.
Yeah, it becomes really challenging unless you have it. It's a disaster, and it's like, okay, well, we don't have the data, and they were advertising for I think almost like 3 years. So it was not pretty.
Yeah.
So one question over here that we have from Philip: how do you make adjustments to ads and keywords to improve quality score without negatively affecting conversions, like making adjustments to improve the relevancy of the ad?
Yeah, and exactly, Philip. So that's the thing, right? Don't put quality score before conversion rate. I mean, certainly there's ways to improve both at the same time, but you do have to be careful, and you do have to look at the ultimate metric, which is what is your cost per acquisition, what's your ROAS, what's your profitability. And so in the example that I showed of eBay and like that one word on the ATM machine in Britain, it can be something as subtle as what's the action verb that you use. If you tell people a call to action, people are sort of hardwired by nature to go and do what you tell them to do. So if you say fill out our lead form or request a free quote, you say that in the ad text, then people typically come to the landing page and you've predisposed them to go and look for that action. So now hopefully the landing page also makes that action easy to find, but rather than puttering around and not knowing what to do, you've told them what to do, and we've actually seen numbers that people are more likely to go and try to do that action that you just told them they should be doing. So subtle changes to calls to action, subtle changes to a single word that kind of changes the meaning of things, that can have a pretty big impact. And then the other thing is try to stand out from competition. So a ton of people use dynamic keyword insertion fairly lazily. So they might just say, let's put the keyword into the headline of the ad, and let's go with that. Right now, you look at the search results page, and all of the ads look exactly the same. If you can stand out from that, you could do some great things. I've actually written an article about a year ago in Search Engine Land about talking about benefits, not features. People tend to be very feature-focused about their products, but tell the user why it's going to make their life better. That tends to resonate more. That tends to lead to higher CTRs. But these are studies that we've done. These are averages. So what is an average is not necessarily applicable to you, and that's where ad testing comes into play. And so we have tools to help you with that too through Optimizer. But give all of those things a shot. And then the final point on this is we've seen situations where people are continuously doing ad testing, and they've done 5 tests, and every time the test loses to the control. At that point, you might want to back off, because what you're doing by continuously testing is continuously reducing your click-through rate, your conversion rate, and you're actually making your business smaller. So if it's taken you 5 times and you still can't figure out how to make the ad text better, back off, maybe ask someone else to take a look at it, or just give it some time. So that's kind of the counterpoint to continuous testing, to make sure nobody shoots themselves in the foot by doing that.
Excellent. And Frederick, you mentioned that you guys offer a free trial of Optimizer?
Yeah, so we have a 2-week trial. People can just sign up on our homepage. It takes about 30 seconds to get your AdWords account connected and to start getting some of this data.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. So I would recommend that to our webinar attendees. Now, here's another question from Brandon. And he's saying, I have a client who bid on their own brand name. This brand name keyword has a quality score of 3, yet the CTR is 20% plus. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've seen similar situations, and so the quality score, like I mentioned, is position normalized. So a quality score of 20% for an ad that shows at the top of the page in the number 1 position may actually not be high enough. Google may be expecting you to do even better, say 30%. The other argument that you then hear is, well, it's my brand. How can I not be a quality score 10 out of 10 on my own brand? There's nothing more relevant than this. And that's because Google doesn't measure it in terms of semantic relevancy. They really honestly do measure it in terms of CTR. So if for some reason people don't click on your ad, but they prefer your organic result, you can actually see these cases. And I think Netflix was victim to that at one point too. So Netflix, on their own brand term, had a very low quality score, and so they called up Google and they were very upset for kind of obvious reasons. But then we said, well, listen, the reason that your quality score is low is because you're getting all of these free clicks through your organic channel. So, look at the overall picture and don't get stuck on the fact that, you want to pay us money when in fact you're getting it all for free through SEO. But as a downside of that, yes, your quality score for that keyword is lower because people strongly prefer your organic result.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's take a couple of more questions over here. Erica is asking, does Google take into consideration how often you optimize your account versus accounts that are dormant?
No, so they don't really look at how often you interact with your account. And I mean, I've certainly seen situations, and I think this was more the case in the past, where accounts that had been around for a long time tended to do really well and kind of lock in those high positions and be pretty comfortable in terms of quality score. I think competition is just getting all that much tougher. There's so many more new features and capabilities being launched that if your account is dormant and you're not really putting in side link extensions and other extension types, you're probably going to fall behind pretty quickly to your competitors. But just in and of itself, Google, if you've got the perfect account and you haven't touched it for a year, that's fine by Google. And again, think about it in terms of the bottom line. If your dormant account is delivering the best CTR that's possible, Google will gladly take that money and not penalize you for it.
Definitely, no, that makes sense. A couple questions in terms of quality score. One, a question comes from Swani, and the question is, if I have a low quality score due to landing page experience, even though the content is highly related, what can I do to improve quality score? And the other question, any advice on improving quality score on mobile?
Yeah, so as far as the landing page, I think Bing looks much more at semantic relevance between the keyword and what's on the landing page. Google less so. Google cares much more about the user experience. And so what happens when a user comes to your landing page from an ad? Do they tend to stick around? Do they tend to quickly leave and go and click on the next ad result? You can probably tell which would be a good signal and which would be a bad signal. So in terms of improving the user experience, making sure that people are finding what they need, that's what I would look at. So look at your bounce rates, time on site, pages per visit, those types of GA type signals, Google Analytics signals, and see if you can somehow improve those. And so we had a recent example from one of our customers who said what they did is they put an H1 tag under a landing page with the keyword in it, and almost instantaneously they started seeing better landing page quality scores. And so it's not because Google's looking for H1 tags that include your keyword, but it's probably because the user goes to the page and the first thing they see in a big font is the keyword they just searched for. Boom, now they think this is actually relevant. Let me spend some time on this page to see what they offer. And that had a pretty big impact. And again, it's a pretty subtle change. It's not a big change, but it can have a pretty dramatic impact on user behavior.
Very good. And in terms of quality score for mobile, any advice on improving that?
Yeah, so for mobile, and that's the thing where Google doesn't really break it out. So what I would advise is you do have the ability to have word ad text. Take advantage of that and test things separately. So one of our tools in Optimizer is an A/B ad testing tool, and we can help you do the analysis for mobile preferred versus non-mobile preferred ads. So if you're running 4 ad tests, you might start seeing that there's a different winner on a CTR basis for mobile devices than for non-mobile devices. And so rather than taking a generic approach and saying one ad that we're going to run across all devices, test stuff out and see if there is a difference in behavior between the different device types. And again, if you can then translate that into a better CTR for mobile devices, that's more money for Google. So they're going to give you preference in those cases as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So with that, Frederick, I got a couple of questions as well about the slides. Are you going to make them available to the attendees? Like I mentioned, we are going to have the webinar recording available this Monday, but how about the slides?
I can probably make those privately available to everyone who registered, and we can include that in the email to everyone who attended today. Yeah, so that's always good news when people want to get the slides. So hope this was very interesting content. Thank you for with me, and again, thanks to Khalid for hosting this on behalf of Invesp.
Thank you guys for attending. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, December 10th. We're actually having Diane Pease from Cisco. She runs their AdWords program. She's going to be talking about how to make your life easier with AdWords. With that, hopefully we covered all the questions. It seems like we're getting more questions. We'll send them to Frederick, see if there's a way maybe he can answer them via Twitter. Otherwise, thank you guys for attending, and until next time, enjoy your time. Thank you.